What does that mean?
Okay, do you understand what the distance is? Because those numbers are distances. Do you understand what that is?
That's
Yes or no?
How distance I'm from the Australian, right?
Wait, no. Do you know what those numbers mean? Because they're distances. Yes or no?
So to this distances. This is a distance. This basically is saying this. This is how distant I'll be from basically Jew Ethiopian. 61%. That's the distance.
Is that what that means?
No, the distance represents the DNA match that's closest in your immediate line. So Limba is the closest in your history, right? So you're closest in distance to being a Limba than you are being an Australian. That the larger the number, the further in history that goes. So in some part in your history, you had relationships. You had family lineage that ties back to Jew Ethiopian, right? But your furthest distance was the Castanoans, right? That you're that far off from them, okay? But 14 is the shortest, meaning your distance is short, meaning you're closer to Limba than you are the other ones.
Hold on, Kevin G. Why is Kevin G saying that's not?
Go ahead, look, Google it, Mr. Kevin. You can get on here, Google it. I'll wait.
When we see this 14.4, right? We see this 14.4 Limba, right? Can y'all see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So what would that say? What is that saying about me? What is that saying about me? What do you think that's saying about me?
That means that your closest relative within that particular project is the Limba, meaning you're 14 distances away. It could be a cousin by a cousin by a cousin, or a brother by a brother. It's not necessarily cousin, but that's the closest proximity. The smaller the number, the closer you are. Just like when you said one means that you have a parent there. None of us have parents over there because of the transatlantic slave trade. But that means your closest relative was like 14, not necessarily even 14 generations down. It's just your closest proximity to a relative.
Greetings. So you just heard some clips from a show which aired on Berean TV titled Giving Thanks. And that show was considered a high point for the approach to DNA, which had been taken by the Teo twins and their supporters. Now, in those clips, you heard the Teo twins and Sister E basically treating GEDMatch Oracle results as revealing populations which you descend from. And they were also treating the distance function as revealing how far back those populations fall in your lineage. However, I'm sorry to say that they were mistaken. They were badly mistaken. You see, the reality is that just because you get a population in your Oracle results, that does not mean you actually descend from that population. And the distance measurement which is provided is not measuring how closely related you are to those populations. So in this video, I want to discuss how GEDMatch Oracle actually works. And note that we're discussing specifically Oracle, not GEDMatch proper, not simply GEDMatch, but rather more specifically Oracle. You know, this will serve as a sort of addendum to my previous video on GEDMatch Oracle, but this time I want to focus on the spreadsheet function in GEDMatch, as that provides the key to understanding how one gets certain reference populations listed in their Oracle results of a given calculator or project, right? And that's why I chose this image of the car, which you see on the screen, as to use a phrase employed on the data mining DNA site. We're going to take a brief peek under the hood, so to speak. And as luck would have it, last night I discussed how GEDMatch Oracle relates to GEDMatch Spreadsheets on Vocab Malone's channel, on a show which aired on Vocab Malone's channel. So for the rest of this video, I'm simply going to play that portion of the discussion. And as you watch this clip, the main points to take away are that Oracle does not measure shared DNA. Rather, Oracle is simply comparing how you scored across a given project's categories to how the listed reference population scored across those same categories. And I'm going to illustrate what that means. And in that regard, the distance measurement is not telling you how closely related a listed population is to you, like how far back it is in your lineage. Rather, that distance function is simply the result of a mathematical formula comparing your different percentages with the given categories, within these categories, to the percentages, of the listed populations. And again, this will make sense as you watch the clip. And ultimately, the conclusion here is that, the conclusion, therefore, is that you do not demonstrate anything about your lineage merely by pointing to an Oracle result, right? If you say, look, I got this in Oracle, you have not told us anything about your lineage. That's reality. And it's in contrast to the Teo twins and their supporters saying things like, look, I got Lemba in Oracle. I got Ethiopian Jew in Oracle. Therefore, I have proven that I descend from the biblical Jacob. You know, honestly, with all due respect, that was a bad argument on their part. And I think this is going to demonstrate that. So I'm going to go ahead and play the relevant portion from Vocab show last night. And we're going to pick this up at slightly after the 1 hour, 7 minute mark. And this is going to run for slightly over 11 minutes. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, and criticisms, as that will give me a sense of whether there's, more to discuss and clarify. Though, honestly, I feel like this should close the book on the argument which merely appealed to Oracle results. So on that note, here's the clip. Enjoy, and God bless.
That, right? There's this question of when they say that they're related autosomally to the Lemba, what they mean there is that they got Lemba in GEDMatch Oracle. There's a lot of excitement amongst that crowd, especially the Teo twins, and to a lesser extent, Sister E. There's a lot of excitement about GEDMatch Oracle. It's not even GEDMatch proper. It's Oracle, which is like the next step down, right? When you're using GEDMatch, there's like this fun tool called Oracle, right? And so if you could pull up that link I sent, the dataminingdna.com.
Yes, I got it right here. I'm pulling it up, and I'm going to show it on the screen.
So what
here.
we're going to show here is a discussion on Oracle, because if for anyone who's interested, you can see a discussion that I had with the Teo twins on Berean's channel. It's a show called What We Have Received DNA, or you could just see my own video on GEDMatch Oracle. But we're going to go through very quickly some of the relevant points. If you could scroll down, there's a section which reads, it's going to be in large letters, what is GEDMatch Oracle? It's about maybe a fifth of the way down. Or you could, I don't know, it's number 2 in that table of contents. Yeah, so it's be right after this section. So you'll notice it says, what is GEDMatch Oracle? This is explaining the Oracle tool. And that second paragraph is what's important here, right? Because they're getting excited about the fact that they used Oracle and they got hits for Lemba in Oracle. Oracle came up in a list of hits. And so they're using that to say, well, that means I'm autosomally related to the Lemba, right? So if I can, I just want to read that second paragraph.
Okay. We'll highlight which part?
The second paragraph where it says it's important to understand.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about this. Again, sorry. I was trying to respond to a comment, but I forgot. Problem. It's going to take me off.
This one says, if I could read this, it's important to understand that Oracle isn't measuring shared DNA between your kit and the reference samples. I want to repeat that. Oracle is not measuring shared DNA between your kit and the reference samples. It's calculating how closely the breakdown of your ethnicity percentages match the breakdown of a reference population across the same categories. And now I want to explain what that means. If you did a test with 23andMe, for example, you can then send your raw data from 23andMe to GEDMatch, and they'll run your DNA against different samples that they have within different calculators. So different quote-unquote calculators have different sets of samples that they compare you to, right? Now, there's 3 things to see here, right? So these are my results in specifically the Dodecad Africa 9 calculator, right? And again, different calculators compare your DNA to different samples, and some calculators are more limited, some are more expansive, right? So what's relevant here is there's 3 things relevant. You'll see at the top of the screen it says spreadsheet. That's a button that if you're in GEDMatch, you can click on that and you'll get a spreadsheet which will give you the data of the reference populations that this particular calculator uses. Then underneath that, you have this table where it says population, Europe, Northwest Africa, Southwest Asia, East Africa, etc., right? These are my results in this particular calculator where it says I'm like 62% European, 5% Northwest African, 27% Southwest Asian, etc., right? So here's what's relevant. So what's in that table, these are what that text was referring to as your ethnicity percentages or the categories, right? When someone checks the spreadsheet, they see all these other reference populations like Ethiopian Jews, Italians, or more specifically, it might say Sicilians, Tuscans, Northern Italians, North Africans, Moroccans, etc. It has a whole bunch of populations, and it shows how they scored in those same categories. Now, what excites the Teo twins is there's a button underneath the table that says Oracle. And when you click on that, you get compared to these populations. And they think it means that if a population appears in their results, it means you're related to that population. That's what they wrongly think, even though we just read.
But it's not showing.
It's not measuring shared
saying,
DNA.
It's not showing people it's not showing that. Okay.
Right. It's not saying you're related to those populations. Not at all. Right. So again, these are my results in specifically Dodecat Africa 9. What happens is if we click that,
putting himself out there.
Yep. So this is what happened. If you click the Oracle results, you get this, what you find here, right? And you'll notice that at the top, right, of the top of my results in specifically Oracle for Dodecat Africa 9, I have Tuscan. And then underneath that, I have North Italian. Now, here's something that stands out, right? I don't have any actual Italian ancestry. Now, I love Italian culture, Italian food, the Italian language, so I would love to be able to claim it, but I don't. Now, being that I got hits for Italian in Oracle, not GEDMatch proper, but Oracle, does not give me the right to claim that I'm Italian, right? But it does beg the question then, what is going on here? Good, you were going to say something?
No, yeah, I just said you wish.
Yeah, I wish. I'm not cool like Vocab, but I wish I was. And so let's say if I wanted to play the same game that they play, where they say, look, I got Lemba, therefore in Oracle, therefore I must be related to the Lemba. Let's say if I wanted to be Tuscan, I wanted to be Northern Italian, I could say, oh, look, I got Tuscan, I got Northern Italian.
Yeah, but, I'm almost 22%.
Something like that, right? So what the distances there are, you notice there's a column on the right that says distance, and the numbers get higher. Yeah. The lower the distance means the closer you are to that reference population. But it's a mathematical formula. All it means is that when you go into the spreadsheet, you can see how they scored on those reference populations. Remember, we saw those reference populations that said like European, North African, Southwest Asian, right? So their samples are also measured on those reference populations, and your distance is based on how close your references are to them. So what this is going to do, it's going to take data from the spreadsheet for Africa 9, and it's going to Dodecat Africa 9 calculator and compare it. There we go. Excellent. So let me just lower this real quick. Okay, so now what you see is in that second column, what the spreadsheets allow you to do is see how the reference populations scored across these categories. And I'm putting in that second column, I put in how I scored on those second columns. Across these references, of course, across these categories. So you'll notice, for example, my European percentage, according to Dodecat Africa 9, is 62%. Their Tuscan sample averaged out at 69%. You'll notice that my Southwest Asian percentage was 27%. Their Tuscan sample was 29%. So why was Tuscan so high on my list? Not because I have any Tuscan ancestors, but simply because my percentages were closest to the Tuscan percentages. And it was also close to the North Italian percentages, but less so. That's why there was a higher distance for North Italian. So too with Moroccan Jews, the numbers get further and further away as you go across, right? But the main thing to keep in mind is that when you get a hit for a population in Oracle, specifically Oracle, it's not telling you anything about your ancestry. All it's telling you is how closely you matched up across these broad categories of like European, Southwest Asian, Biaka Pygmy, etc. Right? That's really what it's measuring. It's not telling you anything about shared DNA or shared ancestry. So now these are certain populations when you use the MDLP World 22 calculator, right? And I highlighted the row for Sub-Saharan African, right? And you'll notice in the fifth column, or the fourth column if you don't count the population column, it's the Lemba column, right? And you notice the Lemba percentage for Sub-Saharan Africa, their Lemba samples averaged out to about 88 or 89% Sub-Saharan African across these categories. Now, what this means is if you give your results to GEDMatch and then you run it through MDLP World 22, the closer your Sub-Saharan African ratio is to 88%, the closer you'll be listed to the Lemba. Not because you actually descend from the Lemba, but only because it's measuring how your breakdown across these categories matches up with the breakdown of these populations across the same categories. So when they say, oh, look, I got Lemba in GEDMatch Oracle, they think it means they descend from the Lemba or they're autosomally related to the Lemba. All it means is that their basically their sub-Saharan African admixture is a certain distance away from the Lemba percentage in that category. And I know this was a lot to unpack, but I think this is important.
Okay, so
So, for example, if you have an African American who scores 80% in this particular calculator in the sub-Saharan African category, they'll get compared to the Lemba. The main point that I was trying to illustrate here was what was said explicitly in that blog entry, the data mining DNA site, and this is also said on GEDMatch's own website, that it's not showing your ancestry. You know, you could be related to these populations, but you're not demonstrating any relation to any of these populations by showing an Oracle result. All it's showing is similarities in the breakdowns across the broad categories that are used by a particular calculator. And keep in mind, there's a lot of different calculators available on GEDMatch.
So, though Jacobo has not demonstrated that he is related autosomally to Lemba, he's basing that on a GEDMatch Oracle result, one which he misunderstands, I believe, as well. And that's what we just showed there, too. And so Oracle is not measuring shared DNA between your kit and the reference samples. It's calculating how closely the breakdown of your ethnicity percentages match the breakdown of a reference population across the same categories. And that's what Abu just showed.
And they're very broad categories.
Yeah, so
that's why someone like me with no Italian ancestry can get a hit for Italian in GEDMatch, Oracle, specifically Oracle, because their Italian samples will have like this mix of like European, North African, and West Asian DNA, and I have a similar percentages, you know? And it's the same thing. Anyone who has, let's say, somewhere around 80% or close to it, 70% sub-Saharan African DNA is going to get a hit for Lemba because the Lemba have 88%. It has nothing to do with shared DNA. And so that subsection there was to show that there was a lot to unpack there, but it showed that they, on multiple levels, they didn't understand what was going on when they made this claim. How can I have haplogroup G if I'm autosomally related to the Lemba? You know, it was a bad argument on like 3 different levels.